Hello and welcome to part 3 of our video series on building a TypeScript and Postgres API. Today we're going to be taking a look at setting up our Express server to start handling incoming HTTP requests, writing our first unit test for our Express server, and also writing our first mocks for an external library, which is a key component to writing any kind of tests, but predominantly unit tests make use of a lot of mocks. If you want to follow along, there's a link in the video description to the GitHub repo that we're using, and if you check out the branch part 3, you'll have the code exactly as it appears on screen, and you'll be able to follow along with me. So first things first, we're going to create an index.ts file at within our source directory, and we're actually going to start by writing out our Express app code. So first things first, we're going to import Express from Express, and then we're going to create an app. So we're going to do export const app equals Express. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to make our app server listen, or API server listen to incoming requests, and we do that by calling app.listen. And what this does is it takes in a function. Well, at first it takes in a port. Actually, the first argument is a port, and then the second argument is a function that should run after our server has started and is listening to incoming requests. So what we're going to do, at the top of our file, we're going to declare a port variable. It's fairly common for Express servers or API servers in general to listen on port 3000. So we've created a port variable, and next we're going to create our function that will be called when our server has actually started and is listening for incoming requests. So we're going to create a function, so we'll call export function listener callback. And all this is going to do is just do a console.log, and then we'll use a template literal, and we'll do API server listening on port, and then we'll use port so that it just logs this out whenever our server starts. So we'll pass in the listener callback as the second argument to our app.listen. And in order to get this running, what we're going to need to do is create a script to actually start our dev server. So this one's going to be ts node, and then it's going to be source index.ts. And what we need to do, we've already got ts node installed. So now when we run npm run dev from our terminal, our server should start, and we should get this nice console log saying that our server has started up, which is really nice for when you're actually monitoring your services in production to make sure they start up properly. So we can see that we've got our API server listening on port 3000, which is great. Next up, we're going to add some unit tests, and because what's going to happen if we run our unit test right now is we'll actually get a failure because there isn't test coverage for our index file. And that's because we don't have any tests running against this particular piece of code. So what we're going to do, we'll head into our index unit testing file, clear it out, and then we'll start off with some imports. So we'll import app and listener callback from here. And you'll notice that we actually exported these earlier. If you're never actually testing a function, then you don't need to export them. But generally speaking, I tend to export every function from a file because I like to write unit tests for all of the functions. So the first thing that we're going to do is write a unit test that is just going to check that this app is defined, and that will help satisfy that requirement. So we'll do describe express and then we'll do test. An instance of app is exported. And all we're going to do for this particular one is we're going to do what we need to do is expect app.toBeDefined, and all this test is going to do is just check and make sure that app is defined. What we'll find here, let's rub that out for a moment. What we'll find now that when we run this unit test is it's actually going to, it should actually pass straight away. But what you'll notice is that because we don't mock out the jest library, it actually starts up the Express server and then never shuts down. So we should talk about mocks. They are an integral part of unit testing with Jest. And a mock is essentially a way of stubbing out a library, so kind of mimicking that underlying library behavior, while also providing you the ability to check and see whether that library has been interacted with. So the way that you actually do this within Jest is just using the jest.mock function, and you can pass in a library that you want to mock. Now, Express is a pretty complicated library, and sometimes Jest can actually struggle to automatically mock the library. And the reason for this is because the actual Express library under the hood, the default export from it is both a function, but also a function that has additional methods attached to it, which Jest sometimes struggles to mock. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually implement a custom mock for Express so that we can give Jest some instructions on how to do that. Now, for any libraries that are included in your node modules, which are external dependencies that you've installed as node modules, the way to do that is to add a __mocks __ folder at the root of your project. And within that folder, you add the name of the library that you want to mock with a TS file extension. And now within here, what we're going to do is first we're going to define Express. So we know that Express is a function, so the default export from it is a function, and that function has a bunch of different bits of functionality attached to it. So for example, it has listen as a function that's associated with the returned value from the actual Express function invocation. So what we're going to do is we'll add on listen, and we're going to call that, we're going to make that a jest function. And this will essentially make it a mocked function invocation. So if we now do export default Express, then what we should find is that when we now run our unit tests, they will make use of this mocked file that we have here for how Express should be implemented. So you'll notice if we actually go into our tests here and we let's import Express from Express, you should find if we just do a quick console log in here for what Express looks like, then we should find that it actually has a function. That's a default function that's been exported. And now if we actually test what Express is after it's been invocated or invoked, we'll find that it's got this listen function, which is a mock function that we've attached to it as part of our mocks. Now, this is not the normal way of mocking. Most libraries just can automatically mock them for you, so it's not too arduous. But like I say, Express is a bit of a trickier library, so we have to take these additional steps. But it's useful to know how to create a manual mock that can be used across your application. So next up, we'll notice that our unit tests are actually telling us that we are missing some code coverage on line 8. So if we go back to our file here, we got line 8 is not being covered because this particular function here, listener callback, is not actually being tested as part of our code. So what we're going to do is we'll do a quick test for this. So we'll do a describe block for the listener callback. And then what we'll do is we'll write a quick test that says console.log is called when the listener is invoked. Now, testing that console log is called is actually quite an interesting conundrum because console is a global variable, but actually it's fairly easy to mock that out as well. So what we can do, first things first, is we're going to take a snapshot of what the current console log function is so that we can reset the mock after we've mocked it out. And then what we'll do is we'll do global.console.log equals jest.fn. So we're making console.log a mock function now, which we can listen to actually see if it's actually interacted with, which you'll see in a moment. Next up, we'll call the listener callback function. So we'll actually invoke the function, and then next what we want to do is actually see if console.log was actually called. But what we'll do first of all, actually, before we do that, is we'll export this port variable, and you'll see why in a moment. We'll just import it here. So now what we want to do is write a simple expect function or assertion that says expect global.console.log.to have been called with. And now what we want to do is just check that we've actually called console log with the text that we were expecting. So we can just copy this, pop it in here, and you'll see why we imported the port variable now, so that if for some reason this port variable changes, our test will automatically pick it up and it works as we expect. And that what we should do is we should, after the test has run, is we'll do global.console.log equals log. So we'll actually reset the global console log back to what it should have been, just to make it nice and clean, and so that any tests that run after this one, if they make use of console log, it's returned to its original state. So let's take a look now. Let's run our unit tests again and take a look and see where we're up to. So what we've got now is we've got 100% test coverage on our Express server. We are able to stand our Express server up and it will listen on the defined port. And we're now ready to take the next steps in building out our application. So in the next video, what we'll do is we'll have a talk about how we can introduce dynamic configuration. What you'll find at the moment is we have this port variable defined here. But when you start working with applications in a production environment, what you'll find is that there are common parts of an application that are configured differently depending on whether they sit in one environment or another. So if it's out in the production environment being used in the real world versus a developer environment, they might actually have different ports. So we'll talk in the next video about how we allow our application to be configured using environment variables to support a dynamic configuration. I hope the video has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you next time.